Picture this scenario for a second. It's a Tuesday morning. One of your employees, maybe a senior analyst in the finance department, they sit down at their desk, coffee in hand.
Right, just a normal start to the day.
Exactly. They open their inbox, and there's an urgent email from your company's primary banking partner. It flags a required security update for the corporate treasury account. Now, this analyst isn't a novice.
They've been through the security training.
Yeah, they've been through the corporate security ringer, so they verify the sender address. It's a flawless match. They hover over the link, or maybe they click through and really scrutinize the URL bar. The address reads exactly, letter for letter, like the real bank.
And the padlock icon is probably sitting right there.
It is sitting right there. The page branding, the CSS, the font rendering, it is completely immaculate. Feeling secure, they enter their credentials and they drop in their multi-factor authentication code. And just like that, before they've even taken a second sip of coffee, your company is compromised. The keys to the treasury are just gone. And why? Because a single Cyrillic A was seamlessly swapped for a Latin A in that web address. They were looking right at it and they never saw it coming.
Yeah, it's the ultimate digital sleight of hand. When visual trust is weaponized against us like that, the standard decades-old security advice of just, check the URL, it becomes actively dangerous. We're basically asking human visual processing to identify cryptographic manipulation, which is a fundamentally impossible task.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to tear apart the mechanics of what the cybersecurity community calls Punycode phishing attacks, or homograph domain threats based on our source materials today.
It's a huge issue.
It really is. We're going to figure out exactly how these invisible threats operate at the infrastructure level, why they're cutting right through millions of dollars worth of enterprise security stacks, and most importantly, how you can protect your organization's critical assets from an attack that is literally designed to be unseen.
And, the foundational vulnerability here isn't a bug in a specific piece of software. It's rooted in a fundamental friction in the architecture of the internet itself.
How so?
Well, we have a highly localized, restricted legacy routing system that's trying to accommodate a massively diverse global user base.
Right.
Whenever you have that kind of friction, engineers have to build a translation layer to make things work. And in threat modeling, translation layers are inherently fragile. They are the exact seams where attackers pry systems open.
So we need to look at the domain name system. We all know DNS is the routing fabric of the web, translating human-readable domains into IP addresses.
The internet's phone book.
Exactly. But the limitation, the original sin of DNS, if you will, is that historically it only processes ASCII. It is strictly limited to the 26 letters of the English alphabet, the digits 0 through 9, and hyphens.
Just a very small character universe.
Right. That is the entire character universe that the core internet root servers were built to understand.
Which, that was fine in the early days of ARPANET, but it creates a massive logistical nightmare for a globalized internet.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're a business in Munich wanting to use the proper layout in München.com, or an enterprise in Tokyo needing kanji characters, the ASCII restriction means your native language is structurally invalid on the network.
The DNS resolvers would simply drop the request.
Exactly. And upgrading the entire global DNS infrastructure to natively support UTF-8 or complex character sets, that was considered logistically impossible.
Yeah, you'd have to simultaneously update millions of legacy servers worldwide.
Right. So the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, they had to engineer a workaround. They needed to allow rich Unicode characters, which encompasses basically every linguistic script on Earth, to exist in domain names without actually changing the ASCII-only rules of the DNS root servers.
So they built a bridge, like a mathematical workaround, and that is Punycode.
Specifically, it was formalized in RFC 3492. Punycode is an encoding scheme. It's a highly specific algorithm within the broader internationalized domain names in applications, or IDNA, framework.
IDNA, right.
It takes a string of Unicode characters and programmatically compresses and translates them into a valid, albeit very strange-looking ASCII string. It's basically a behind-the-scenes conversion mechanism.
I was trying to conceptualize this, and it reminds me of a telegraph operator back in the 1800s trying to transmit a complex Chinese character over a standard wire.
That's a great way to think about it.
Because the physical wire only handles dots and dashes binary signals, right? So the operator has to encode that beautiful complex character into a standardized numerical grid, send a bunch of ugly numbers over the wire, and the receiving operator uses a ledger to translate those numbers back and paint the character onto the paper.
That is a highly functional way to visualize it. The DNS infrastructure is the telegraph wire. It only handles the basics. The web browser is the operator on either end doing the translation.
Right.
So when a user tries to navigate to a non-ASCII domain, the browser intercepts that request locally. It runs the Punycode algorithm and spits out the encoded ASCII string.
And there's a specific flag for this, right?
Yes. The defining architectural feature here, the mandatory flag that the system uses to identify this translation, is that the resulting string is always prepended with a specific 4-character prefix.
Which is XN dash.
Exactly, XN.
Right. So XN is the system telling the DNS server, hey, don't try to read this as a normal word. This is an encoded instruction set.
Right at the signal.
And DNS routes that ugly string perfectly, hits the destination server, and returns the data to the user. But here is where the browser makes a critical, localized decision that completely undermines endpoint security.
Yeah, this is the crux of the issue.
When the data comes back, the browser looks at its own address bar, sees that XN string, and essentially decides, I shouldn't subject the user to this ugly machine code.
It wants to make things pretty.
Exactly. So it runs the algorithm in reverse. It decodes the Punycode back into Unicode and renders the rich native characters on the screen.
And that localized rendering decision is the exact fault line. The browser prioritizes user experience and seamless linguistic accessibility over raw data transparency.
Which makes sense for accessibility, but
attackers understand that if they can control what the local rendering engine displays, they basically control the user's operational reality.
let's look at the mechanics of the visual deception itself. I was looking at a real-world example earlier from our sources. The actual registered domain string is xnppl-43d.com.
Okay. Yeah.
If you look at that raw ASCII, it looks like a junk spam domain. But when the browser encounters that XN prefix, it parses the trailing characters based on the RFC 3492 algorithm, and it renders it visually as apple.com.
It looks perfect.
It does.
Yeah.
But the mathematical reality of what is rendered is entirely different from the genuine corporate domain.
You're dealing with the inherent overlap in human typography, specifically within the Unicode standard. Unicode maps thousands of characters across dozens of different scripts. Because languages evolved with shared typographical roots, many characters across completely different alphabets share identical visual representations.
Especially on modern screens, right?
Oh, especially when subjected to the font rendering engines and subpixel anti-aliasing used in modern browsers. These are known as homoglyphs.
Homoglyphs.
Yeah. So in your example, the rendering engine translates that specific Punycode string into a Cyrillic small letter A, followed by the standard Latin characters for PBALA.
Cyrillic A looks completely indistinguishable from a Latin A on a high-definition monitor.
Utterly indistinguishable. An attacker doesn't need to spoof an entire brand name or rely on obvious typo squatting, like, adding an extra letter or something.
Right, like apple.com with 3 Ps.
Exactly. They just perform a single character substitution using a homoglyph from a different linguistic plane.
But wait, if the browser is the application actively executing this reverse translation, isn't the browser essentially overriding our security protocols?
In a way, yes.
Because it takes the raw, verifiable truth, the XN string, and paints a deceptive overlay right on top of it. It's like actively facilitating the illusion.
It's the unwitting accomplice. The browser's rendering engine is designed to blindly trust the encoding standard. It assumes that if a domain resolves, the intended Unicode display is legitimate.
It just doesn't know any better.
Right. The browser doesn't inherently possess the contextual awareness to know that mixing a Cyrillic character into a Latin brand name is a hostile act. It just processes the IDNA framework as instructed by the IETF, and threat actors ruthlessly exploit that rigid adherence to the standard.
Which brings us to how this architectural blind spot is weaponized in the wild. The attack lifecycle for these campaigns is remarkably standardized. It usually operates in 4 distinct phases. Let's start with the initial vector, registration.
Okay, so threat actors begin by profiling a high-value target. This might be a cloud infrastructure provider, an identity and access management portal, or maybe a major financial exchange.
Sure.
They consult Unicode mapping tables to find the most convincing homoglyphs for that specific brand name. Then, they simply query standard domain registrars to purchase the XN equivalent of that spoof name.
And the economics of this are absurdly asymmetrical. I was looking at an incident from the text involving the cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase.
Oh, that's a classic example.
The attackers registered cl@base.com, swapping the Latin O for a Cyrillic OO, The overhead for that registration is what, $10 to $15?
Barely. The barrier to entry is virtually non-existent. For the cost of a cup of coffee, an attacker acquires the most critical component of the campaign visual real estate that perfectly mimics a platform holding billions in digital assets.
It's terrifying when you put it like that.
It really is. And once they control the routing for that homograph, they immediately move to phase 2, which is infrastructure setup. And this isn't a manual process anymore. It's entirely automated through sophisticated phishing as a service kits.
Right, they aren't manually writing HTML to make the site look convincing.
No, not at all. They deploy a kit that dynamically scrapes the target's legitimate site. It pulls down the DOM structure, the CSS frameworks, the exact web fonts, and the high-resolution SVG logos. It spins up a pixel-perfect clone on the attacker's server in seconds.
But what about the certificate authority infrastructure? We've drilled it into users' heads for a decade to verify the TLS connection. Look for the padlock icon. If the site is malicious, shouldn't the certificate validation fail?
This highlights a significant shift in how we manage cryptographic trust on the web. The padlock icon only validates the presence of transport layer security TLS.
Right.
It just means the connection between the user's browser and the server is encrypted. It guarantees data integrity in transit. It does absolutely nothing to verify the moral character or the legal identity of the entity controlling the server.
That's a huge misconception.
It is. In the past, acquiring an SSL or TLS certificate was a manual, expensive process with rigorous vetting. But the push to encrypt the entire web led to the creation of automated certificate authorities, like Let's Encrypt, utilizing the ACME protocol.
The automated certificate management environment.
Correct. The ACME protocol allows anyone who can demonstrate technical control over a domain's DNS records to request and receive a domain validated or DV certificate instantly and for free. Because the attacker legally registered the XAN homograph, they easily pass the ACME challenge. Let's Encrypt provisions a valid cryptographic certificate for the malicious domain.
So the browser completes the TLS handshake, validates the certificate chain against its root store, and happily displays the secure padlock icon next to the visually spoofed domain.
Exactly.
The user has a highly secure, mathematically encrypted tunnel piping their credentials directly into an adversary's database.
Yep. The visual cues of security, the padlock, the familiar UI, are all weaponized to lower the victim's defenses. From there, phase 3 is delivery, getting the payload in front of the target.
Spear phishing is the obvious route. Highly targeted emails, spoofing internal IT departments or known vendors. But we're also seeing this heavily utilized in business email compromise, or BEC.
BEC is where homographs are particularly devastating.
Because of the context, right?
Exactly. If an attacker compromises a vendor's email thread and injects a homograph link for a wire transfer authorization portal, the context of the existing conversation completely masks the anomaly.
You just don't expect it.
Right. They're also utilizing search engine poisoning bidding on keywords for the target brand and directing the ad traffic to the homograph domain. The user searches for their corporate login, clicks the top sponsored result, and lands on the spoofed infrastructure.
Which triggers phase 4, exploitation. The user authenticates. But modern corporate environments don't just rely on passwords anymore. We have MFA. So how are these kits bypassing time-based tokens or push notifications?
Well, modern phishing kits operate using an adversary in the middle, or ATM architecture. They don't just harvest static credentials.
How does that work?
When the user lands on the homograph site and enters their username and password, the attacker's infrastructure programmatically opens a simultaneous real-time session with the legitimate target site.
Oh, wow.
When the legitimate site challenges the attacker for an MFA token, the attacker's fake site immediately prompts the victim for that same token.
So the victim looks at their authenticator app,
Right.
types the 6-digit code into the fake site, and the attacker just relays it to the real server.
Instantaneously. The legitimate server validates the token and issues a highly privileged session cookie to the attacker.
They steal the cookie.
Right. The attacker intercepts that session cookie, stores it, and then redirects the victim's browser to the actual legitimate application so the user thinks they just experienced a minor login glitch.
That is so seamless.
The attacker now possesses a persistent, fully authenticated session token. They bypass the MFA requirement entirely because they stole the cryptographic proof of authentication after the fact.
Wow.
Unless the organization enforces hardware-bound FIDO2-compliant security keys, which cryptographically bind the authentication challenge to the specific verifiable origin domain standard MFA, is completely vulnerable to ATM proxying.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This brings us to a massive point of friction for security operations teams. Organizations are dropping millions on enterprise security stacks. We're talking next-generation firewalls, sophisticated secure email gateways, endpoint protection platforms with behavioral
Yeah,
heuristics.
the expensive toys.
Right. Why are these deeply integrated, highly expensive tools failing to catch a $10 lookalike domain?
Because the underlying logic of most traditional security tools is deeply reliant on historical reputation and signature-based detection.
Okay, break that down.
Take a standard secure email gateway, or SEG. Its primary mechanism for evaluating a link is querying global threat intelligence feeds and massive block lists. But homograph domains used in targeted campaigns are often zero-day infrastructure.
Meaning they're brand new.
They were registered hours, sometimes minutes, before the attack was launched.
So the domain has literally zero historical footprint. The SEG queries the database, finds no negative reputation score, and defaults to a permissive state.
The gateway's logic is, I have no evidence this is malicious, therefore I must route the business communication.
It fails open.
Exactly. Furthermore, many URL rewriting mechanisms tools designed to wrap links in a security proxy so they can be analyzed upon click. They fail catastrophically at the translation layer.
How so?
The parsing engines within these security tools frequently fail to properly decode the IDNA framework. They might analyze the raw XN string without recognizing its homograph potential, or they might analyze the rendered Unicode and fail to detect the mixed scripts.
So the tool itself gets confused.
Right. If the security scanner's regex engine gets confused by the encoding, it typically fails open rather than blocking potentially legitimate global traffic.
The parsing logic is flawed at the perimeter,
All right.
and once it gets past the perimeter, it hits the endpoint. And the threat surface is radically amplified by mobile devices. I mean, we're consuming so much corporate data on iOS and Android devices right now.
Mobile platforms are the ideal environment for this type of deception. The screen real estate is severely constrained. Address bars in mobile browsers aggressively truncate URLs to save space, often hiding everything past the top-level domain.
Yeah, you barely see anything.
In many applications, as soon as you scroll down, the address bar vanishes entirely. More importantly, the tactile interface removes a critical investigative tool, the hover state.
Right. You can't hover your cursor over a hyperlinked button on a smartphone to preview the true destination URL in the status bar. You commit to the navigation the millisecond your finger touches the glass.
Exactly. The user is stripped of their preliminary reconnaissance capabilities. Furthermore, the handling of IDN rendering is wildly inconsistent across mobile operating systems and embedded web views within native applications.
Oh, like opening a link inside an app?
Yeah. You might have a scenario where Chrome on Android correctly flags a homograph, but a link clicked within a third-party social media app uses a native web view component that blindly renders the deceptive Unicode.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the traditional advice of training users to scrutinize the URL is fundamentally obsolete. It relies on a premise of visual integrity that just no longer exists. If the SEGs are failing and human visual inspection is unreliable, we have to look at the application layer where the deception actually takes place.
A browser.
Right. We have to address the browser configuration.
If the browser is the engine rendering the illusion, modifying the browser's default behavior is our most immediate, high-impact defensive capability. We need to revoke the browser's permission to prioritize aesthetics over security.
Where do we start?
The initial step is behavioral training, teaching highly targeted individuals to aggressively hunt for the XN prefix.
Right, because no matter how sophisticated the homoglyph is, the underlying ASCII routing must adhere to the IDNA protocol.
Yes, the math doesn't lie.
If you inspect the raw source of an email, or if a security tool exposes the true hyperlink, the presence of XNSN in a corporate context is the ultimate red flag. It's an indicator of compromise.
Unless you are actively conducting business with an international partner utilizing a legitimate, registered native language domain, encountering an XN prefix targeting your primary English language corporate applications is a definitive red flag. But relying on users to spot a 4-character prefix hidden in a complex URL string is not a scalable enterprise strategy.
No, definitely not.
We must enforce this technically.
Let's get into the weeds on browser configurations, because this is where IT teams can actually gain some ground. If we look at Mozilla Firefox, their approach to this is quite rigid, which is great from a security perspective. How do we manipulate Firefox's handling of the IDNA framework?
Mozilla provides direct access to the browser's core rendering logic. By navigating to about.config in the Firefox address bar, you access the advanced preferences.
Okay.
The specific parameter governing this behavior is network.idnshowpunycode.
Network.idn show Punycode. And by default, Mozilla ships with this set to false, meaning it renders the Unicode to support internationalization.
Correct. But by toggling that Boolean value to true, you forcefully disable the reverse translation algorithm globally within the browser.
Wow.
Firefox will cease rendering all internationalized domains. If a user navigates to a homograph targeting your company, the browser will strip away the Cyrillic or Greek homoglyphs and expose the raw, mathematically accurate XN string in the address bar.
The visual deception is instantly shattered.
Yeah,
It's like putting on the sunglasses from the movie They Live. Suddenly you can see the alien code hiding in plain sight. It's a binary fix. But what about the Chromium ecosystem? Chrome and Microsoft Edge dominate the enterprise landscape. Do they offer a similar binary toggle?
The Chromium project takes a more nuanced, heuristic-based approach. Google and Microsoft recognize that a binary toggle breaking all international domains degrades the global user experience too severely.
Right, you'd break half the internet for non-English speakers.
Exactly. Instead, modern versions of Chrome, so Chrome 75 and above and Edge 79 and above, utilize complex site isolation and mixed script detection algorithms.
How does the mixed script detection actually parse the threat?
The browser analyzes the Unicode character blocks requested by the domain. It cross-references the characters against predefined linguistic scripts, Latin, Cyrillic, Greek, Han, etc.
Okay.
If the browser detects that a single domain label attempts to mix characters from distinct, non-compatible linguistic scripts, for instance, inserting a Cyrillic character into a predominantly Latin character string, the security engine flags it as an anomaly.
Because there's virtually no legitimate linguistic rationale for mashing two different alphabets together within a single word.
Precisely. Furthermore, Chromium evaluates the domain against the user's localized operating system language and keyboard layouts.
So that's smart.
If you're operating a standard English US layout and navigate to a fully Cyrillic domain, the browser may elevate its suspicion level. When these heuristics trigger, Chromium automatically overrides the standard rendering process and forces the display of the raw Punycode, exposing the XN prefix. It attempts to be intelligent about when to break the illusion.
So keeping those Chromium-based browsers strictly updated is non-negotiable, as those heuristic definitions are constantly refined. But the outlier here, and the one that causes massive headaches for enterprise security, is Apple's ecosystem. Safari's handling of Punycode is notoriously permissive.
It is. Apple's core design philosophy heavily emphasizes seamless user experience and global accessibility over aggressive security friction. Consequently, Safari's default posture is to render Unicode heavily, often bypassing the strict mixed script heuristics found in Chromium.
That's rough.
Safari will frequently present the visual homograph seamlessly to the user, making it exceedingly difficult to detect the attack natively within the macOS or iOS environment.
I mean, that is a severe vulnerability for organizations that issue MacBooks to their executive teams or rely heavily on iOS devices. If the endpoint browser refuses to expose the raw code, you're flying completely blind.
It necessitates a significant shift in defensive strategy. If you operate a heavy Apple footprint, you cannot rely on endpoint visual detection or native browser heuristics. You must aggressively compensate upstream at the network perimeter and DNS filtering layers to ensure the malicious traffic never reaches the Safari rendering engine in the first place.
And for the Windows and Linux fleets, we obviously aren't asking end users to manually edit their browser registries.
Configuration management must be centralized. You utilize group policy objects, GPOs, in Active Directory environments to force strict Punycode display policies onto every Chrome, Edge, and Firefox installation across the domain. You lock down the configuration so the end user cannot override it.
Right.
For remote or zero-trust architectures, you deploy these configurations via Mobile Device Management or MDM profiles. You standardize the endpoint's reaction to the IDNA protocol.
So we've established the technical guardrails at the endpoint. But users are still going to encounter links on unmanaged devices, personal phones, or external networks. We need a heuristic framework for the human element. The community has developed a fairly rigorous 7-point checklist for verifying link legitimacy in this context. Let's break this checklist down, starting with the immediate infrastructure indicators. What's number one?
Number one is hunting for the prefix. When evaluating a suspect link, the first instinct should be investigating the underlying infrastructure routing, bypassing the visual display entirely. We mentioned the XN prefix. If you can inspect the raw email headers or the source code and locate that prefix targeting a domestic brand, the evaluation stops there. It is malicious.
Got it. Number 2, what about desktop hover checks? We know mobile is out, but on a workstation, hover text is still a primary tool.
Hovering remains relevant, but you must analyze the discrepancy between the hypertext and the destination. You aren't just looking for obvious spelling errors anymore. You are looking for structural routing anomalies. Does the hover reveal a convoluted subdomain chain designed to push the actual root domain out of the visible window? For example, login.yourbank.com.secure-auth-gateway.net. The visual focus is on the left, but the actual routing authority is on the right.
Okay, that's number 2. Number 3 is mixed scripts.
Right. Look for Latin and Cyrillic mashed together if you have tools that expose the character blocks.
Number 4, we also need to talk about WHOIS registration data, right? This seems like one of the most definitive checks available.
It is the ultimate chronological truth. A WHOIS query accesses the global registry databases to pull the exact creation date of a domain.
And these homographs are usually new, right?
Inherently ephemeral.
Yeah.
They are registered specifically for a short-term attack window. If you query a domain claiming to be Microsoft or a major banking portal, and the WHOIS record indicates it was created 48 hours ago, you have cryptographic proof of fraud. Legitimate enterprise domains have creation dates stretching back decades.
Okay, number 5, certificate validation. We established that Let's Encrypt provides free DV certificates, but an advanced user can still interrogate the certificate chain to spot an anomaly.
Exactly. While a DB certificate provides the padlock, it doesn't provide identity assurance. Legitimate financial institutions and major enterprise platforms typically invest in organization-validated OV or extended validation EV certificates.
Which require actual vetting.
Right. These certificates require the certificate authority to manually verify the legal corporate entity requesting the cert. If you click the padlock on a highly sensitive portal and drill into the certificate details, you should see the legitimate corporate entity listed in the subject or organization fields.
And if it's blank.
If those fields are blank, or if they just repeat the domain name, which is characteristic of a free DV certificate, that is a massive infrastructure discrepancy for a Fortune 500 brand.
So those are the infrastructure checks. But what if the user is forced to rely purely on visual cues because they don't have time to run a WHOIS lookup? Are there subtle visual quirks they can look for? That's number 6.
This requires a highly trained eye, but yes. Because the browser is attempting to render characters from entirely different linguistic planes on the same baseline, you often see subtle typographical collisions.
Why does that happen?
This is due to font fallback mechanisms. If the primary system font doesn't contain the specific Cyrillic or Greek homoglyph, the browser silently substitutes a glyph from a different font family to prevent rendering a blank square.
So the kerning gets messed up.
Exactly. The spacing between the letters might appear unnaturally compressed or expanded. The baseline might shift slightly, causing one letter to sit a fraction of a millimeter higher than the others. Or you might notice anomalous diacritical marks, like a microscopic dot beneath a vowel that shouldn't be there. These are the visual artifacts of the rendering engine struggling to seamlessly blend disparate Unicode blocks.
And finally, number 7, the context of arrival. Did it arrive via an external message or email?
Context dictates the required level of paranoia. If you manually type a URL from memory or utilize a vetted, internally managed bookmark, the threat model is low. But if the URL enters your environment externally via an unsolicited email, an SMS message, a direct message on a social platform, or even a link dropped into a Slack channel by an external vendor, the risk profile escalates exponentially.
The golden rule here is aggregation. If the context of arrival is external, and you detect anomalous kerning, or a DV certificate where an EV cert is expected, or a recent WHOIS creation date, any single positive indicator among those checks mandates that the link is treated as hostile infrastructure.
It shifts the burden of proof. The link is assumed malicious until cryptographic and infrastructure verification proves otherwise.
This brings us to the strategic level. Training an individual analyst is necessary, but how does a chief information security officer operationalize this across an entire enterprise? We need a layered defense strategy that assumes the endpoint visual inspection will eventually fail. Let's look at the operational roadmap to build true resilience against IDNA abuse.
A defense-in-depth architecture must intercept the threat at multiple points in the kill chain. We started the network perimeter with aggressive DNS filtering policies.
Right. If these domains are highly ephemeral, we should leverage that chronological weakness against them.
Precisely. You configure your enterprise DNS resolvers or your cloud-based secure web gateway to categorically block or sinkhole any DNS query attempting to resolve a domain that has been registered within the last 30 days.
A newly registered domain block.
Yes, an NRD block. Because homograph campaigns rely on zero-day infrastructure to bypass reputation filters, an NRD policy neutralizes the attack vector before the global threat intelligence feeds even have time to analyze it. It severely limits the attacker's operational window.
What about email authentication protocols? We touched on the fact that attackers often try to spoof internal addresses to increase the perceived legitimacy of the homograph link.
This is where strict enforcement of DMR, SPF, and DKIM is critical. These aren't new protocols, but their application here is vital. You must configure your DMRC policy to P-reject.
P=reject.
Yes. This cryptographically instructs all receiving mail servers globally that if an email attempts to spoof your corporate domain in the from header but fails the underlying SPF or DKIM cryptographic alignment checks, the server must drop the connection entirely.
It prevents the attacker from masquerading as internal IT while delivering the homograph payload. It forces them to use external suspicious sender addresses, which increases the likelihood of user detection.
Moving down the stack to the endpoint layer, we need to leverage endpoint detection and response, or EDR, telemetry. We established that the local system must eventually resolve the XN string to initiate the network connection.
So we monitor the process execution and network socket creation.
Exactly. You engineer custom detection logic within your EDR platform to monitor all outbound network connections originating from standard user processes, specifically web browsers, PDF readers, and email clients. You construct a rejects pattern to identify any connection attempt to a domain string containing XN.
Oh, that's brilliant.
If an endpoint attempts to establish a socket with a Punycode domain that is not explicitly whitelisted as a known legitimate international business partner, the EDR immediately suspends the process and alerts the Security Operations Center.
That gives the SOC real-time visibility into the exact moment the IDNA protocol is triggered on the network. But there's another highly proactive strategy discussed in the Stack Exchange community sources we looked at: defensive domain registration.
Ah, yes.
The idea that a company should preemptively purchase the homographs of their own brand. I have to push back on the economics of this.
Let's hear it.
The Unicode standard contains over 100,000 characters. The mathematical permutations of homoglyphs for a standard enterprise brand name are practically infinite. Isn't registering our own spoofed domains a bit like playing endless whack-a-mole? I mean, registering all of them would be financially ruinous.
Your assessment of the mathematical permutations is correct, but the strategic application of defensive registration isn't about achieving absolute coverage. It's about altering the economic calculus for the adversary.
Okay, how so?
Threat actors operate on ROI. They will systematically target the most visually convincing homoglyphs first, the Cyrillic A, the Greek Omicron. These are the characters that most easily bypass human detection.
They grab the low-hanging fruit.
Exactly. By identifying your organization's most critical operational domains, your SSO gateway, your VPN portal, your primary brand URL, and preemptively registering the top 20 or 30 most visually identical homograph variations, you would effectively deny the adversary their most potent weapons.
You take away the easiest tools.
Right. You force them further down the Unicode tables to utilize less convincing characters, which inherently increases the visual noise of the spoof and raises the probability that your users or your heuristics will detect the anomaly. For an investment of a few $100s a year, you significantly degrade the attacker's easiest path to success. It's a highly efficient risk reduction tactic.
That makes a lot of sense. You're shrinking the viable attack surface. But regardless of the technical controls, the human element remains the final perimeter. And the standard compliance-based security awareness training, clicking through a slide deck on a Friday afternoon, is demonstrably inadequate for this specific threat vector. It relies on logical processing to combat a visual exploit.
To inoculate the workforce, you have to bypass logical compliance and target their actual behavioral responses. The most effective methodology, widely endorsed by advanced red teams, is the execution of highly realistic, visceral phishing simulations utilizing active Punycode infrastructure.
Walk me through the architecture of a visceral simulation. How does an internal security team safely weaponize this against their own staff?
The internal offensive security team, the red team, legally registers a highly convincing homograph of the company's primary authentication portal. They procure the DV certificate and clone the login page, perfectly mirroring a real-world adversary's Phase 1 and Phase 2.
Okay, so it looks perfectly real.
Yes. They then meticulously craft a spear phishing campaign tailored to internal corporate events or highly relevant operational mandates and deliver the payload to the employee base.
And because it's an internal test, it bypasses the segs, the email lands in the inbox, the employee evaluates the context, inspects the URL, sees the flawless homograph, and executes the click.
And this is the critical pedagogical moment. The internal IT team have already enforced the strict browser configurations we discussed earlier via GPO, forcing the browser to display the raw Punycode.
Oh, I see where this is going.
As the employee's browser resolves the connection and loads the page, the user physically watches their trusted, familiar corporate brand name dynamically shatter and revert into the ugly, incomprehensible XN string right in the address bar.
The illusion violently breaks while they are staring right at it.
Exactly. And the page that renders isn't a credential harvesting form. It's a direct intervention page. It explicitly details the exact typographical deception they just fell for. It highlights the Cyrillic substitution. This creates a profound cognitive dissonance. The user experiences the visceral shock of being actively deceived by their own visual processing.
It proves to them unequivocally that their eyes are an unreliable narrator in the digital environment. You can't achieve that level of psychological impact with a multiple-choice quiz. It builds profound muscle memory and a healthy level of operational paranoia.
It creates a workforce that actively anticipates deception rather than passively assuming legitimacy.
So to synthesize this into a cohesive operational cadence, how frequently should a mature security organization be exercising these protocols?
It requires continuous integration. On a weekly basis, the threat intelligence team should be programmatically monitoring global certificate transparency logs. These are public ledgers of every TLS certificate issued worldwide. By constructing queries that look for newly issued certificates containing Unicode variations of your brand name, you can literally watch attackers provisioning their infrastructure in real time, often days before the phishing emails are actually dispatched.
You're detecting the campaign during Phase 2 infrastructure setup, allowing you to proactively blacklist the indicators of compromise before delivery even begins.
Exactly. Monthly, you execute the localized, visceral phishing simulations to maintain the behavioral edge, and you audit the fleet's MDM profiles to ensure the strict browser configurations haven't drifted or been overridden.
And quarterly.
Quarterly, you review your defensive domain portfolio, analyzing new threat intelligence to determine if new Unicode blocks are being actively weaponized, and you acquire those domains accordingly.
Got it.
And annually, you commission a comprehensive external red team engagement. You task them with executing a full-scope homograph campaign against your perimeter to stress test the DNS filters, the EDR detection logic, and the human response mechanisms under realistic adversarial conditions.
It's a relentless, layered approach to neutralizing a vulnerability that is fundamentally baked into the Internet's architecture. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's summarize the architecture of this threat. We explored how the IETF engineered Punycode as a necessary mathematical bridge to overlay a diverse, globalized linguistic reality on top of a rigidly constrained legacy ASCII routing system. It was a triumph of accessibility. But threat actors identified the browser's local rendering engine as the critical fault line, weaponizing the inherent typographical overlaps within the Unicode standard to execute flawless visual deceptions, completely bypassing traditional reputation-based security gateways.
But the defining operational takeaway is that this visual deception is not omnipotent. By understanding the underlying mechanics of the IDNA protocol, we can systematically dismantle the illusion. We strip away the browser's permission to deceive us through strict endpoint configuration. We neutralize the ephemeral nature of the infrastructure through aggressive DNS filtering, and we inoculate our workforce through visceral experiential training that proves the fallibility of human visual trust.
And for you, the listener, the immediate application of this intelligence is critical. Whether you're managing an enterprise network or just securing your personal digital life, you have the capability to alter your operational environment today. You can access your browser's advanced configurations and mandate the display of raw Punycode. You can integrate the practice of interrogating certificate subjects and analyzing hover discrepancies into your daily workflow. Knowledge of this architectural vulnerability is only valuable when it's actively operationalized to harden your defenses.
We possess the technical capability to enforce cryptographic truth over visual comfort. It's simply a matter of choosing to implement those controls.
As we close out, I want to leave you with a final strategic thought to consider regarding the trajectory of our digital infrastructure. We have spent this hour dissecting the friction caused by retrofitting Unicode onto a legacy system. But the internet's linguistic footprint is expanding at an unprecedented velocity. The bodies governing domain registration are continuously introducing entirely new top-level domains, and they're aggressively expanding the authorized character sets to natively onboard the next billion global users. The sheer volume and complexity of available scripts is accelerating. As the mathematical pool of potential homoglyphs expands from the current thousands into the millions, encompassing incredibly complex multi-byte character arrays, how long until the concept of visual inspection for any digital asset, whether it's a routing URL, a digital identity token, or even the metadata of a communication stream, becomes mathematically impossible for a human to verify? How long until we reach an inflection point where we must entirely abandon the concept of visual trust, forcing us to rely exclusively on invisible, underlying cryptographic proofs and hardware-bound authentication to navigate every single interaction in our digital reality? It's a paradigm shift that is rapidly approaching. Think about the cryptographic reality the next time you look at a URL and see what your brain tells you is a perfectly normal letter A.